Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and I am joined once again by Sarkis the Great.
Hi.
Um,
I don't know if you got that reference.
I did not, but that's okay.
Okay.
We're gonna continue this time. So we've gone over some different things, and now we've got a couple different series going. But I want us to get back into the Gita. We haven't spent any time in the Gita for a little while, and I want us to get back to it because we don't want to leave our Hindu brosifs and sheologians hanging over here. So, um, let me remember how to share my screen, and then we can pop into it here. Uh,
Yeah.
Here we go. Share. All right, so we've got we're in chapter 3 of the Gita and we are on verse 17. And before we started, Sako was telling me that he doesn't remember this particular chapter having tons more for us to kind of dissect. So we're probably going to be relying on the Ramanuja commentary quite a bit, but other than that, um,
Yeah.
this might you guys might not hear a lot of discussion other than from me, who might need to ask some questions about what exactly is being said, and yeah, who knows? We might find some fruitful ground for good discussion about how this relates to our Lord Jesus Christ, but I think chapter 4, Sako was saying, is where we're going to get into some questions about the incarnation, and I look forward to that. But let's dive in. So, Sako, I'll just start reading on verse 17, and then you can, like I said before we started, you can kind of just stop me if there's anything
hmm
that you want to get into. But here we go. So verse 17. But the person whose delight is only in the self, who is satisfied with the self and who rejoices in the self, for him nothing remains to be accomplished. And Ramanuja says, but for one who is not in need of the means of jnana yoga or karma yoga, who has a natural predisposition to achieve self realization, and who is satisfied by the self alone and not by food, drink, and other things which are distinct from the self, who rejoices in the self alone and not in the pleasure gardens, garlands, or sandal paste. I don't know what that is.
That's
Vocal. What's that?
it's a type of paste that is like sort of smeared. It's like it's like a sweet smelling wood paste that's used to like almost lacquer certain things.
Okay.
I think in some cases it's used as lacquer. Other times, because it's not like toxic to the people, it's sometimes also uses like a sweet smelling oil. Um, for like anointing or perfume.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So he's like, uh, okay, I see. So he's using it as kind of like a catch-all thing for,
For like luxuries, yeah, or
right.
like the good things of this world.
Okay. Cool. Vocal and instrumental music, etc., and for whom everything is the self alone, his substance, nourishment, and enjoyment. For him, no activity remains to be done in order to achieve self realization because he is spontaneously and continuously aware of the essential nature of the self. Um,
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
not too much to say here. I mean, we've already kind of uh, trodden on this ground many times before. That
Yeah,
our from a Christian perspective, our disagreements with this understanding of the self and what it is. If I haven't mentioned it before, I would say in a sort of nutshell, from a Christian perspective, we would agree more with the Buddhists that you don't have an essential true self that is like irreducible
right.
because it's an entirely contingent being. we would argue that the true self is something that emerges, and it emerges only when you have um, when you have reached your teleological end in God, and essentially become what God intended you to be. Then that is your true self. You're sort of fully, telos is like, the telos of a seed is to become a tree.
Right.
So when Hindus would say like, uh, you're a fully realized individual, it means that like you sort of like realize the nature of the true self, which is like essentially divine. But if you're Buddhist, it means you've realized that all things are impermanent, and you achieve, nirvana, and then after death nirvana, which is like the end of rebirth. Um, for us, realization isn't like a mental thing, it's the whole person. So a fully realized person isn't like enlightened in the sort of Indian sense of the word. It's when a person becomes their true self, and that true self is what God intended for them to be, when the tree fully develops into a seed. And so those who are not saved, who do not undergo theosis, um, or sanctification, as people in the West call it, um, they do not, unless, by God's, special mercy in their case, if there's extenuating circumstances, um, they can't enter the kingdom of God, because morally, rather than growing, they've shriveled and died.
Right.
Like, instead of the seed becoming a tree to be part of the garden of God, so to speak, it 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 doesn't grow, or it might grow for a time, but then it sort of um,
It
cuts
withers.
itself. Yeah, it cuts itself off from the source of its nutrients in life and dies. And so
Right.
those in hell are basically seeds that never became trees. Or I don't
Yeah.
like. I should catch myself in this. I don't like to say hell. Those in
Right.
Gehenna. Yeah, so let's make that a discipline to be more theologically clear. Yeah, Gehenna, not hell.
Right. Those terms are used interchangeably even by the fathers, but like when we're trying to have theological clarity,
Mhm.
um, which we should because we're engaging with people who aren't Christians right
Mhm.
now, so we should be very clear.
Yeah.
Like, yes, those terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but they do have nuance there. So,
Uh,
um,
wait. The fathers used Hades and Gehenna interchangeably.
well, in the same way that I mean, in like a colloquial sense. So, like, sometimes fathers will talk about like even, sometimes fathers will talk about hell, like people being in hell now. But
Oh, okay.
properly speaking, people don't experience hell until after the resurrection. Um, so like, but that doesn't mean that that's always the way the fathers use it. I
Okay.
mean, if you want to get really technical, people who are going to be in hell are currently in Sheol. But that's not always the
Yeah.
way that the fathers
Yeah.
don't always create like this super clear distinction. Um,
They're in the nasty part of Sheol, as as
exactly.
opposed to just the sort of okay part of Sheol, the not great but okay part that the patriarchs and the saints were in before the resurrection
Right.
of Christ. Um, yeah. So, um, what sort of happens to people who are like not, Hitler, but at the same time not, um, you know, not
Not Saint Paisios.
exactly. Yeah, I was trying to look for a good comparison. What happens to them is in God's hands. That's something that I don't think either of our churches have really come down hard on, in terms of dogma. Um, Personally, if I were to give my, humble opinion, nobody, everybody take it with a fat pinch of salt. I would say the people in that sort of middle category might end up in just like the okay place,
Hmm.
uh, the where the patriarchs were, because yes, Christ emptied it, but I think like he emptied it of the righteous, right? Like,
Right.
or he emptied it of those who he saw as redeemable. So maybe people like, let's say, a native in the Amazon who dies outside of Christ doesn't go straight to heaven, but he sort of goes to like the realm of the ancestors, like just regular old Sheol, and then maybe he stays there until Judgment Day, and then on Judgment Day, Christ decides where to place him.
Yeah, I have no problem with the idea that um that I I have a problem with the idea of people being saved apart from Christ because Jesus says things like, the way is narrow that leads to life, and few there are that
Right,
find it. Jesus says things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
right.
So I have a difficulty with any understanding that places that has people going to heaven without any relationship to Christ. But I have no problem with the idea um, that there are parts of hell that are mild, or that there are parts of um, or that there
Mm-hmm.
are, once somebody dies, that now they do know, and so obviously scripture says it is appointed unto a man once to die, and after this the judgment. But
Yeah,
we know that there's the judgment of the individual, but then there's also the great white throne judgment at the end of time.
right, right.
And so,
That's why I say like maybe people in that middle category are just like go to like the kind of part of
right,
Sheol where everybody went before the death and resurrection of Christ, and they don't go to heaven. Now, if some of them do, by the grace of God, go to heaven because Christ sees it fit to take them to heaven,
right.
like some saints have said, then hey, that's awesome for them. But for most cases, if I had to give my best guess, I would say they go to the okay part of Sheol until Judgment Day, and from there, when on Judgment Day, Christ decides where to put them from there. Like,
Yeah,
uh,
I certainly have no problem with that view. And I'm gonna say something that's gonna annoy our Protestant viewers much more than it's gonna annoy our Hindu viewers.
yeah,
Um, so I realize, if you're a Protestant watching this, I realize that everything Sako and I just said is really gonna annoy you, because from your perspective, all of this stuff should be just really super clear. But here's the truth. Within Protestantism, you guys disagree with each other constantly about, well, who goes to heaven, who goes to hell? Will
right,
unbelievers who never heard about Jesus go to heaven? You guys all disagree with each other about that. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This is not a topic on which the fathers have absolute consensus either.
yeah,
There's pretty firm
because
consent. There's pretty firm consensus that there is in fact hell, that it is in fact going to be eternal, and that there are going to be people who suffer it.
yeah,
And and the worst part of that is you and I can be those people. Like, hell is
yeah,
real and you can
yeah.
go
So
there. So,
yeah, yeah,
like,
so yeah. Sorry, perseverance of the saints.
right, exactly. Those are all things, and sorry, universalists. Like,
Yes,
universalism is heresy. I'm sorry. I
it
realize that
is.
there are lots of people who don't want that to be true, and there are lots of people in our own communions who want to say that oh, you can be a universalist and orthodox. I'm sorry, you can't. That's not an option for us. Um, and neither is perseverance of the saints. These things are off limits.
Yeah,
However,
I
within
mean,
that, vast middle ground of like between those two things, there is actually a pretty broad category. And so, you know,
Yeah,
is it
I
is
think
it as strict as maybe is it as strict as maybe my view? Is it as loose as some other people's views? The truth is, I don't know. We
yeah,
can
but
just
this is why when you read the works of the saints, or read the lives of the saints, or read the works of the fathers, the refrain that comes up over and over and over again is, we entrust them to God's mercy.
exactly.
God is God. We don't know people's hearts, so to speculate
That's
about,
right.
like, I don't even know what's gonna happen to Judas. I mean, I'm not optimistic, but
Yeah,
hey,
I'm not super
I'm
optimistic on that one.
I'm but but who knows? I might be in for a surprise on Judgment Day. You know, like, I don't know.
Well, I'll
Uh
say this. I'll say this. There have even been some church fathers throughout history who have prayed for Satan, like prayed for him to be saved. And
yeah,
um
Isaac was one of those.
right? And I don't think that Satan is going to be saved, obviously. But in
Yeah,
following that example, there have been times where I've been praying for all the world, and I've thought, it would be really awesome if I didn't have a tempter to deal with. So I've prayed, God, I pray that you would save Satan, that you would cause him to come to repentance. Yes, I know theologically it's not possible because he's not mortal and all of these things, but I'm just saying it would help me out a lot. So, like,
yeah,
God,
yeah,
nothing is beyond you. And I've just said that prayer, like it would help me out. I've thought about and even though, so in the same sense, like even though I tend not to be overly optimistic about the salvation of people outside of the church, I always pray for them. I always pray for people
yeah,
who are who even if they have died, like just because I don't have this sense of optimism that a lot of other people do doesn't mean that I don't have hope. So I think that that's an important distinction that we make in Holy
yeah.
Orthodoxy as well.
It's actually kind of interesting with me because, like, I'm more, not super optimistic, but I'm more optimistic on certain things, but less optimistic on other things. So I
Right,
noticed that, because I noticed that some people are like not super optimistic about, like, say, some indigenous people who never heard the gospel getting to heaven, but they sort of comfort, like as a degree of comfort, they sort of envision, like, a type of, like, and I've heard this from both Catholic apologists, and I've also heard it from even some Orthodox apologists. Like, I think one of them was like Craig Trulia, was one of them,
yeah,
who envisioned like unbaptized infants, pagans who died in ignorance, uh, upon the resurrection, just being in a sort of place of natural joy, but without the that's like, that always has like a tinge of sadness because they can never like be in the presence of God. But
right,
hey, at least they have like natural joys and happiness or whatever. I That's where I'm actually more strict. So I'm like, okay, that is between death and Judgment Day, where
right,
somebody could have that experience. Come Judgment Day, you're either in paradise with the saints or you're in abject torment. So
right,
it's like, so I'm more optimistic in the space between death, or earthly death, and Judgment Day, but absolutely not optimistic whatsoever for like post resurrection.
right.
uh,
Yeah.
Post resurrection, I'm like, yeah, no, I don't think there's any middle ground. You're either a sheep or you're a goat. Like,
Right. Which I mean that is how Jesus presents Judgment Day in the gospel. He does not have a category of you're not a sheep or a goat, you're an alpaca. He
right,
doesn't
yeah,
have that.
yeah, yeah. Like, like, because because I to me it's like, okay, when he says like I never knew you, right?
Right.
For some of the people who like just never even heard the gospel, or some of the people who were only exposed to like a heretical gospel or something, like let's say they only knew evangelical Protestantism or what have you, right? It's like yeah, Christ never knew them, or they never knew Christ, but it's like they didn't exactly have as much control. And I'm talking about like, and obviously like the degree to which there's an excuse there decreases with the growth of the internet. So like,
Yeah.
obviously people in the pre-internet age more of an excuse than people nowadays. But even so, nowadays I
Although I
say the
will say this, I will say this because I hear this objection a lot is like, what about people who never heard the gospel or whatever? But I've also, like, I've heard so many stories of missionaries showing up in a place
yeah,
and an angel has already told this group of, like, indigenous people about Christ or whatever.
yeah.
So
Oh,
there
I believe it.
are, like,
I
to
there.
me, I would say God is, we might be limited, but God is not limited. So
Right.
to my mind, it's like if there are these people who are like they have no earthly access to the gospel, but God sees a willingness in their hearts, He's going to make a way for them to hear the gospel. Like I don't actually believe and I could be wrong. Like
Uh,
just like Sako said, where he was like, take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Do that for me too here because I'm
mhm.
saying my view. I'm not saying this with and there are church fathers who echo this sentiment, but there are church fathers who disagree with me too. So
Mhm.
understand that I'm not saying this dogmatically. I'm saying that this is from everything I've studied and everything, this seems to be where I kind of land at the moment, but it just seems to me that I really don't believe that anybody dies without access to the gospel, in that not any person dies without God being able to get the gospel to them if he sees that they're going to accept it. I don't, so like if some in people always say like what about some guy in Africa who never heard the gospel? First of all, you don't know what God has revealed to this random person. Just because no
Right.
missionaries reached him doesn't mean he never heard the gospel. But if someone truly dies, like if somebody truly dies in Islam or truly dies in like worshiping demons in a pagan religion, I don't believe that that person is is saved because I don't believe that that person wanted to be. I believe that if there was a true openness in their heart to the Most High God, then God would have revealed to them himself to them in some way and brought them
Yeah.
out of that false religion. And I'll tell a personal story. I won't give the guy's name because he lives in a Muslim country, but I know a man, I and he lives in a Muslim country, and he would call himself an atheist. Kind of like Salman Rushdie, he would call himself an atheist because he has rejected Islam. However, this man actually attends an Orthodox church every Sunday. Now he has not been baptized. He does not receive the Eucharist because he considers himself an atheist. But he did allow his children to be baptized and his wife to be baptized, and so his whole family receives the Eucharist. And he still goes to church every Sunday despite calling himself an atheist. And when I asked him why, he said that he finds himself very attracted to the God of the Christians. But because he's so disgusted with Islam, or in his mind with religion, he can't bring himself to submit to a religion because he believes that religion is evil because of what he's seen from Islam, and he hasn't overcome that hurdle.
Mm.
I'm gonna be completely honest and say, obviously, if he died tomorrow, I don't know where he would spend eternity, but I suspect that he would be saved. And I suspect that he would be saved because it seems to me, in interacting with him,
Yeah.
that despite his anger, despite his fears and misgivings and the trauma of having grown up in the disgusting world of what I believe to be the worst religion on the planet. Despite all of that,
The Arabian death cult of the pedo prophet.
that's right, the Arabian death cult of the pedo prophet, police be upon him. Um, the
That's the censored version.
right, the despite growing up in that, he still and so how he feels because of that, he is attracted to Christ. He is moved to some kind of relationship with Christ. And that to me indicates that the Holy Spirit is working in him. But you see that, like, God gave him access to the Christian faith because
Yeah.
he saw that openness. If in fact I'm right and he is open. So
Yeah.
in my worldview, I don't actually believe anybody dies without any access to the gospel because I believe that if someone dies unrepentant, it's because they would have died unrepentant. With one exception, and I don't care if people say that this makes me inconsistent. I don't believe that this applies to babies. If somebody dies as a baby, I I just don't believe that God holds them responsible for what they literally never. In fact, I actually believe, and this is what makes it consistent in my mind, is I actually believe that if someone dies a baby, then that in some ways indicates that they might be a greater saint than any of us because God is sees their
It, it,
holiness and spares them from all of the trials and everything that we need in order to make us holy. God just takes them to himself. Now you
yeah.
can say that that's because I had a son who died as an infant, and so maybe I just want to believe that my infant son is such a holy saint that God took him right away. But I'm willing to, and I grant, like, I will be honest with you right now and say, yes, that's what I want to believe about my son.
Right.
Um, but also, I'm
Yeah.
not the only one who sees it this way. There are church fathers who see it this way. I realize they're not Orthodox, but in Mexico, there are lots of Catholic Christians who see it this way and who, when a baby dies, they actually give them great honor and so when a baby dies in certain towns in Mexico, they're actually dressed up in like royal garments and they're called angelitos, little angels, and they are seen as the greatest of saints because of exactly what I said. Like God has seen fit to take this innocent, pure child um, before they could even have the experience of sin or suffering
Yeah.
because he sees that they are already a saint. So, so that's how I see when an infant dies, whether their parents are Hindu or Christian or whatever. When an
Yeah.
infant dies, I think that that infant is saved because I think that God sees a whole other level of holiness that maybe I'll never attain in that person. And you know what? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but that's what I choose to believe about infants who die. Everybody else, though, who aren't infants, like, let's be honest, we've all sinned, so we can't
Yeah.
claim to be that.
Right.
Um,
But I think for the most part, yeah, I agree with you on infants. Which, by the way,
Sorry,
one day,
Calvinists.
yes. um, but I was gonna say one day we should do an episode on the Eastern Christian view of what's it called original sin and baptismal
Yeah.
regeneration.
Oh, I'm
Because
glad you said that because I've been
be,
meaning to ask you if you would want to do that, and it slipped my mind.
yes, yes, I've been thinking about this a lot because I saw an episode recently. I know we've like steered very clear now. Well, okay, we'll get back to our regular schedule programming, but but yeah, like like low church Protestants who deny the supernatural efficacy of the sacraments actually would say like, yes, Kevin, I agree with your view of infants precisely because I don't believe that humans are born with like some sort of taint that like water like spiritually clears up. So sin is not what you are but what you do, and if you're an infant and you die uh, without having done anything sinful or whatever, you're clean. So you're not gonna. So they would agree with you, but they would do so by denying sacraments. So I feel like we
Right.
should make the responding to that.
I agree. I agree. So, stay tuned for that episode.
Yeah,
Um, I have a response, but and Sako does too, but stay tuned for that episode. For now, we've addressed a lot of stuff with our Christian brethren, but
yeah,
we promised the Hindus this episode, so let's give that
yes,
to
yeah,
them.
yes. So
Um, Sorry, Hindus. We're sorry for stealing some of your time, but um
yeah,
anyway, okay. Verse
I, I, I,
18.
I wonder if we should just edit most of this out in post production and just skip right
Maybe
back. Like we we
maybe
we
just
might
like
just have to.
straight up
You know,
remove like
I think we could probably just uh, cut everything out from before we go off on a tangent about hell and damnation. Basically, like we were on topic up in like where I said like, those in hell are seeds that never grew into what they were supposed to be. Like that's as much as we need to say about hell. We can cut
right.
everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so getting back to the topic. So
Getting back to what we actually came here to talk about today. Verse 18.
yeah,
For him there is no interest in what is done or left undone, nor has he to rely on any being for anything whatsoever. Therefore, always perform without attachment that work which ought to be done, for one who acts without attachment attains to the supreme.
um,
Um,
the verse about what is done and what remains to be or what is undone, right?
yeah,
It kind of it kind of makes me think about because uh from a how do I articulate this? Give me a second. Uh, okay, so from a Hindu perspective, this would usually refer to like rebirth. Like there's even
right.
some Hindu philosophers who speculated that a person's rebirth is primarily affected by the last thought they have before they die. That sort of reflects what they want.
Interesting.
Not everyone agrees on this, but it is something that some Indian sages have said in some of their works that like if the last thing you're thinking about is I don't know, like you're let's say you're dying and leaving your son behind, and you're afraid. Let's say you're dying young and your son is still a teenager when you're dying because I don't know, you have cancer or something, and you're like, what's gonna happen to my kid, and that's like your last thought before you die. You might you might stick around for a little bit in the realm of the ancestors before moving on to like a new rebirth because you want to like watch over your descendants or whatever.
Right,
Because yeah, so in from a Hindu perspective, there's simultaneously reincarnation and a realm of the ancestors. The realm of the ancestors is just one realm you could be reborn into among many.
right,
But from a Christian perspective, what stands out to me is like ghosts, maybe.
right.
Like I wonder if the church has anything to say about souls that sort of hang around, or are like in Sheol but sort of penetrate into the world of the living because they have things left undone, unfinished business. I wonder is this compatible? You think?
Oh, I think so. I mean, definitely. So definitely the church talks about that because, like, we actually have prayers for, like, cleansing a house of spirits that are kind of lingering. We have prayers that kind of encourage the spirits to move along.
Yeah,
Like, not all exorcism prayers assume that the spirit is demonic, I guess is what I'm getting at. So that's a
yeah,
thing. And then also that is a category of the demonic that we have is like the Book of Enoch kind of demonic, or I guess it's actually the Book of Jubilees, that talks about this. But like that's one of the categories of demons is we usually think of fallen angels, but actually the more common category within Scripture is entities that were once human and have become demonic basically because they refuse to they still want to interact with the world, even though they're
yeah,
spirit beings now, and so they become either demons or kind of imps, where they're like tricksters. So like scripture refers to these as shadim, or shades, which is a term that's borrowed from, I think Assyrian or Akkadian or some other
mm.
literature. But it's borrowed
Yeah.
from that for good reason.
Yeah. The Hebrew word for the shades of the dead is Rephaim.
Right, the Raphaim, which Raphaim actually that word comes from the word that described a specific set of kings. So like I guess my point is that like there's a tacit assumption at least that these
Yeah,
guys were once alive and once were this group of kings and now they are these monstrous, sort of false gods, if you will.
yeah,
Um, or, I mean, not even really false gods in that case. They're more like almost reapers of the dead in a weird way. But
yeah.
anyway, the
And
point is that yeah, absolutely,
they're
like that is something that Orthodoxy at least addresses. We don't
yeah,
talk about it a ton, but it's something that we definitely believe happens, and we address that, like, this is a part of reality that this
yeah.
happens.
The Greek word is eidolon,
Yeah. Yeah,
which is
Eidolon, yeah.
which is funny because it's a Greek word, but at least to my ear, it sounds very Gaelic.
It does. It also sounds like the word idol, but I don't know if there's any
Yeah.
connection.
No, I don't think it's just one of
Probably
those
not.
those
Probably not.
coincidences. But yeah, so the Eidolon and in the Greek epics like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, they're often called they're all sorry they're often described as being fragile. Like the fragile shades of the dead in Hades.
Right.
So it's like we're like again in contrast to like the Hindu slash Platonic view, um, where like the disembodied spirit of a person or disembodied atman of a person is seen as like defying the limits of physicality, like a liberated spirit free to come and go or whatever, right? Like a spirit that's broken free of its fleshy prison.
Right.
Uh, there's a an opposing view to this, which is I think shared from, as we mentioned in one episode, most of the world, not just us Christians and Jews, but well, I mean, okay, I'll put a little bit of a disclaimer on the Jews because I don't even know what the hell they believe these days, but
I don't even think they know what the heck they believe these days.
yeah, I mean everything from reincarnation to not even having an afterlife is on the table for them these days.
Yeah.
So let's leave them off to one side. But what ancient Jews and modern Christians believe, and what I would argue most of humans believed, I would argue that the whole liberated disembodied soul, or the soul as being like in a fleshy prison, or the body's like a meat suit for the soul, that's actually a minority view for most of human history.
Right.
the some schools of Greek philosophy believed in it. Uh, Many
So
schools of
did
Indian
Plato.
thought still believe in it. But for most of the indigenous peoples of the world, whether you're Native American or you're Pacific Islander or you're Japanese or Chinese prior to the introduction of Buddhism, the dead are basically like fragile sort of like lingering shadows or echoes of the
Right.
like of the living person, far from being liberated without their body and like being free and not confined by the limits of human flesh. They're actually, it's almost like being like that. It's almost like, okay, in the cartoons when you have like a cat that's like a or a dog, and they're like really beautiful or cute looking, and
Right.
then like in the cartoon something happens and their hair just gets like shaved off, and they're just and they
Right.
just and they just sort of like, I don't know if you can see me, but they're sort of like they cover themselves or whatever.
Right.
That's the soul from our perspective. That's the soul without a body. It's diminished. Even the degree to which it could interact with the physical world is diminished. Like, I would argue that if Hindus were right, like if Hindus and Platonists and those who sort of have this true self view of the soul, the like the soul would be able to interact more freely and more powerfully with the physical world, and I
I
would argue
agree.
it can't. Like, if at least from the paranormal experiences that people have, it seems like it takes efforts for the spirits of the dead to even move an object off a table, whereas I could
Right.
just knock it off the table with my physical hand. You know what I
I
mean?
do it accidentally.
Yeah, like I feel like they have to like almost exert themselves just to move objects.
Right.
Like, that's how diminished they are. So, um, now some of them might argue like, oh, but they're in a higher spiritual state. Their power isn't, or their liberation isn't defined by how powerful they are over physical objects. But I would be like, okay, if they if they can't, put it this way, if a living embodied individual, like you see some of the miraculous things done by Orthodox saints, and hey,
Right.
I'll appeal to the Hindus in the audience, even some of the feats done by living Hindu saints and sages, um, like Ramakrishna and others, right? If they could do all those incredible things in the body, but after death, you can't, like, the most they could do is sort of visit you in a dream.
Right.
How powerful or how liberated are they really? I would say, if anything, they're more restricted. Because wouldn't they be more powerful if having been liberated from the limits of the body, they could do even more, right?
Right.
Like okay, they're not limited by human muscles and tendons, right? Why can't they just, like, you know like, cut a building in half, right? Why don't they have like the
Yeah.
power of like lifting up entire streets full of like lifting up cars and throwing them into buildings or whatever, right? Um, like, I know you guys emphasize the spiritual knowledge, like, oh, having been liberated from the body, they can now like sort of mentally travel to different places at once and go to like all these things. But it's like, wouldn't shouldn't there
But what are
I
they
feel
gonna
like,
do in if they mentally travel to some other galaxy? What are they
yeah,
gonna do there if they can't like
yeah,
interact?
like if all they can do, if like the extent of what they can do in terms of influencing the physical world. And no, this isn't me sort of pitting the physical world or emphasizing it more than the spiritual world. I would argue that from a Christian perspective, we have a more holistic view of the two,
Yes.
not discounting one over the other. I would actually, kind of push back against our Hindu friends here and say that you guys have more of a dismissive view of the physical world than we do.
Right.
Um, but I would say like okay, it, when I think of liberation, I think of a state that's better than what you had before, right?
Right.
So if at best it's okay, I'm trading the ability to impact the physical world for something as simple as picking up a table and like carrying it around for a prolonged period of time. But hey, what I get in exchange is, oh, I can expand my consciousness to be to like sort of stretch it its field of awareness to like the neighbor's house and like the next street over or something
Right.
or whatever is like okay, is that better or is that just different? And if it's just different, why is that better? Because the whole point of the soul being like liberated is it's supposed to be in a better state.
Exactly.
If I don't know. I'll address that more in another thing. But yeah. So I would argue that that's more evidence for our position. If like a truly liberated soul would be able to do what what they could do in the physical body, but even more powerfully.
Which we
Uh,
do see with Orthodox saints. Like, this is something that we do see Orthodox saints doing sometimes. Like, not all the time, but sometimes. Like, when the Muslims were invading Constantinople, one of the times that they were, and I can't remember, Saint John the Fool for Christ, I think it is, cried out to the Theotokos, and then he said that he looked up and he could see the Theotokos over the city saying, I will not allow it to fall. And then it didn't. And the Muslim army just like retreated, even though they had the advantage and there was really no reason for them to retreat. They just did. It was like the
yeah.
Theotokos was
Well,
just like,
and I would
go.
argue again the distinction here is when the saints act in glory, because angels, even angels, right? Because they're like, oh, angels are powerful beings. Look what they can do, right? They can cause like storms and thunder and all that. I would argue that that's not a power they have of themselves. That's because of their proximity to God's glory.
Exactly.
Like I don't think God might have created each one of them with certain abilities and certain unique attributes, but I think the like the even the light emanating off of them is sort of from God.
Right.
Like when you think of angels, these like illuminated beings, like just lighting up the night sky in some of the visions that people have had. I think that might be the light of Tabor, not like the angel wouldn't have that in and of himself.
Yeah, but even if angels whatever we might say of angels or whatever, like the fact is that even Orthodox saints like they display, I guess what I'm getting
Yeah.
at is like to your point,
Mhm.
Orthodox saints display more power in the afterlife in glory,
Yeah.
not less. Like that to us sounds like liberation. Like
Oh
like
yeah.
you
And that's what I was trying to get to the gist of. Sorry to cut you
no,
off.
you're good.
Is that God by being in God's presence, they're truly alive, and thus they're not dead.
Right,
So
exactly.
they're not fragile shades of the dead anymore. They're like the angels. They're these powerful, luminous beings by the grace of God, who take their power from the source of life. Like they're powerful precisely because of their proximity to God. It's like like when you if I'm standing under the light, I'm lit up and you can see my face. But if I get farther and farther and farther away from the light, I'm like a dim, shadowy figure off in the corner. You know what I
Right.
mean? So
Yes.
like the without the body, all a person's spirit is a shade, a dim, faint echo of what they used to be. And by being in heaven, the saints are not that, not because they're luminous by nature, but because they're luminous by the grace of God, by being in His
Yes,
presence.
exactly.
So, so that's what we, so that's the distinction we're making. They're not luminous because, like, oh, they're away. Okay, they're luminous, not because they're away from the body, but as Paul would say, because they're away from the body and with the
And
Lord.
present with the Lord. Exactly.
Were it not for that, they would actually have been better off being in their physical body.
Right, which Paul even says that in scripture. He even says like if Christ is not true, we're to be of all men most pitied. Because it would be better for us if we weren't believers, if Christ is not true. But in fact, it's actually not that way. It is better because we have Christ. Um and not just that, like the like you said, it is because we're absent from the body and present with the Lord. If we're just absent from the body, then we're like even the Old Testament saints like Rachel. I have heard in Ramah the voice of Rachel weeping for her children. Rachel can weep as she sees the Jews being carted off into captivity by the Babylonians, but she can't do anything about it. Literally
Yeah,
nothing. She has no
so
influence over the earth. She's just a faint echo that can weep. But the saints in glory, they can actually intervene. They can do something and they can actually do these great displays. They again, they don't do it all the time because like if they did, then there would be, but they do when God allows them and when they see fit to, they do intervene, and when they do, it is with glory and it is with the power of God. Um, so that that is liberation. Um,
um, right, yeah. So that was the point that I was trying to make is that if to be away from the body is inherently better because we're essentially like divine sparks trapped in a meat suit, as like
right.
Gnostics, Platonists, and a lot of schools of Indian philosophy would hold,
And some Protestants.
and some Protestants, unfortunately, much to my grief. I actually have a couple evangelical friends who I'm trying to get out of that frame of mind right now. But like,
Right.
but um, but if that was the case, then yeah, like a spirit wouldn't have to exert itself so much. Like okay, even communication, right?
Right.
Half the time, like it almost seems like they're making an effort just to talk to the living. Like
Yeah.
it's like this tremendous exertion on them. Like why can't they just like if they're so powerful? Why can't every spirit of the dead, or why doesn't every spirit of the dead, whenever it wants something, um, just sort of just like walk up to anybody on the street, or go communicate with all their loved ones at will
Right.
whenever they like, and just sort of and
Yeah,
just sort
why
of
does it require like rituals and all this stuff?
yeah yeah it's almost like by doing the ritual or whatever, you're sort of like temporarily giving them power to do that thing, even if it's something as simple as talking to you.
Right.
uh, Otherwise they're just like these silent floating like wisps.
Almost like a shade.
Yeah, it's like yeah, well yeah, so it's like I feel like if they were in a much better state, they would have all the spiritual enlightenment, and they would have like the spiritual clarity that Hindus and Platonists and the like say they would have, and they would have more power over the physical world.
Exactly.
They like the spirit of my the spirit of like Socrates or somebody could just like at will walk up to Greek philosophy students and be like, "Oh, I didn't actually say that," and like, why doesn't he?
Hey,
You know what I mean?
exactly. Why doesn't he correct Plato's Republic and all the places where they got it? I didn't say any of that gay stuff.
Yeah. No, so now okay, um, some from a Hindu perspective, it's like okay, maybe he's in a different life. He doesn't remember that past life or whatever. There's any number of answers, but I just say like, okay, let's say just
But
even
surely there'd be somebody.
yeah, like okay, like like, okay, you guys acknowledge, right, that Pitu Loka, the realm of the fathers or the realm of the ancestors, is a place. Okay, why doesn't everyone's granddad who is in that realm
Right.
just interact with their living descendants at will? Why? Like, I would argue that that's further evidence that they do not have the inherent power to do that. They're very weak. They're very diminished, and they're just like barely there.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So
And like
yeah.
here's one, like a lot of Hindus believe, I don't know if all Hindus believe this, but a lot of Hindus believe that Jesus was actually like a Hindu and stuff.
Mhm.
And those Hindus will even acknowledge to some extent that our Christian story of the resurrection comes from Jesus exerting supernatural power as like a guru of some sort. But what I find odd about that is if that were true, then why didn't Jesus exert that supernatural power to correct his apostles from teaching that he was this like that he was this resurrected savior? Why
Yeah,
didn't he explain to them, "No, I've been liberated from all that." He doesn't do that. Instead, he straight up tells Thomas like, "Dude, you can put your finger in the hole in my side and know that it's physically me." That doesn't make any sense. Like, if he's truly this, like, Hindu guru who's been liberated from the flesh, why is he putting
emphasize
such.
it, putting such emphasis on his physicality. Like, here, touch,
Exactly.
oh, feel the marks of the nails. Put your hand in my side. It's really me. I'm not a spirit. And the reason why that's important is because, again, from a Hindu, sorry, not Hindu, from a Hebrew perspective, um, it's like, if they were seeing just Christ's spirit, his shade, if you will, right?
Right.
Um, that wouldn't exactly become the most comforting thing. Like, okay, it would maybe give them some comfort, like, hey, the spirit of our master has come to see us. Maybe, we can at least like talk to him one last time before he goes, back to Sheol or something, right? Because, so yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, I would love to see, um, to interact with the spirit of one of my loved ones. That would be like
Yeah.
mean the
It's
world to me.
better than nothing.
But from like the messianic perspective, it wouldn't be that much of a comfort. It's like, okay, our master died and now his spirit has come to speak to us.
Right.
Okay, but he's still dead. Ergo,
Right.
the messianic aspirations have failed. The what makes the messianic mission a success is he's literally alive in the flesh with
That's
blood and
right.
muscles and bones and all that.
Exactly. One other question that I have before we go on, one question
Yeah.
that I have is do Hindus have any kind of belief in like vampires?
Um.
Because otherwise my next
Yeah.
point won't be meaningful to them, so I won't make it. But if they
Yes, but
do.
typically not. I don't think it's in the form of bloodsuckers. It's more of like feeding off of the life force of the living.
Okay, so actually like the earliest vampire stories in the West carry that same thing. In fact, a lot of early vampires aren't physical beings necessarily, or at least not always. But what I was going to say is if if being apart from the body is automatically better and somehow liberating, then why do entities, even evil ones, choose to possess humans, and why do some deceased humans choose to become vampires? Like, wouldn't they actually be better off not doing any of that stuff if, in fact, they're better off as like, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like for those who choose to be like a vampire, some sort of like reanimated corpse of some kind. Which um, I'm a bit agnostic about whether those exist or not, but I'm open to it. But for those, but yeah, but like the rhetorical weight of behind the story is still true. It's like, why do these dead return to their bodies? Why do they insist on sticking around? Don't they have some glorious realm of higher consciousness or intellect to be in? You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Exactly. Like, why do we like? Okay, if you're saying that that story is just a myth or whatever, it's not true. But why does that story even exist if the dead are just better off? Like, it. Some part of us knows that that's not true. I'm not agnostic about it. I actually do believe vampires exist, but we don't have to go too deep into that today because, like, I don't want to distract from the
mhm.
point you were making. But I just thought of that. Um, okay. Do you want to
Yeah,
go on to verse
it's
19?
like the implication here is that what the experience they're having without the body is comparatively worse, and so
Exactly.
even if it's in like a rigor mortis written corpse that they're trying to re-inhabit, or even if it's in like a statue of a god in a temple that they're
Right.
choosing to inhabit, it's better than what they wouldn't have otherwise. Um,
Exactly.
like, so if inhabiting a dusty stone statue in a temple is preferable, then what does that say about what state they're in? Like,
Exactly.
that body.
Like, it's gotta, it can't be that great.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Do you want to move on to verse 19 or are you needing to go to bed?
I can move on. Honest. I can keep reading.
Okay.
I luckily I took a nap during the day.
Oh, sweet deal. So you're like, I can go for hours. No. The power. Um, okay, verse 19. Therefore, always perform without attachment that work which ought to be done, for one who acts without attachment attains to the supreme.
Okay,
Um,
I mean, not too much to say there. Right? We could
yeah,
probably
feels like
because
it's
it's essentially, yeah, just talking about like the detachment of the liberated soul and all that. Uh, I mean, the only thing that I could really add to that as a Christian is we kind of have that with the saints.
right.
Uh, and yeah, so okay, let's keep going.
Verily, by karma yoga alone did Janaka and others reach perfection. Indeed, you should act bearing in mind the welfare of the world. So even Ramanuja says even royal sages like Janaka and others who were the foremost among enlightened ones preferred karma yoga as the means of attaining perfection, thus having first declared that for an aspirant for liberation who is unsuited to jnana yoga, karma yoga alone should be practiced. It was next convincingly taught that even for one who qualified for jnana yoga, karma yoga is still the preferred means. Now it is going to be taught in verses 20 through 26 that karma yoga must be performed in every way by anyone who is virtuous, at least for the welfare of all beings. You should work even if there is no need for yourself. Um, I mean, again, like, I don't really have anything to add to this. I feel like we've already addressed
Yeah,
this a
we
lot. Other than,
yeah,
like Sako
I mean
said, we
we
see this in the lives of the saints for us.
yeah, exactly, and we sort of have a parallel in this in the book of Ecclesiastes, and it says, "Whatever your hand endeavors to do, do it mightily." Um, because like basically saying like because eventually you won't have the chance because you're gonna die.
Right.
So and but hey, I will give this is one of those areas where I will give uh I'll give props to our Hindu brothers and sisters and their literature, because this thing of like acting out of concern for the world, out of compassion for the world or
Right.
whatever. There, India is probably India and maybe China are like the only pagan traditions that I know of where that's even a thing. Except okay, um, okay, actually hold on, let me rephrase that. There's a couple cases. Uh, India, China with some schools like Taoism. Although with Taoism it's more inconsistent, and then Zoroastrianism. So India, China, Iran. Those three cultures are the only ones that have where the pagan traditions taught any sort of sense of duty to the creation, to the world, to like living beings and all
Right.
that. For everyone else, it's like either just the world sucks, the gods are dicks,
Exactly.
or the world sucks. Attain higher, attain higher intellect, higher philosophical and mystical knowledge, so you can leave the world. Oh, and but what? But hey, while you're here, be nice to people.
Yeah.
That's about it. Like that, I'm describing like the Platonists here.
Right. Exactly.
So I will give credit where credit is due. Uh, to our Hindu friends, like they're, I would say like them and Iranians are probably the historically the most virtuous of all the pagans.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, and it's because of stuff like this. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's
like
awesome.
in a sort of modern, you know, post-Christian, post sort of Western normalized worldview. I don't. Oh, 1 second.
All right.
Sorry.
So, oh,
But in that sort of context, it's like, oh, it's saying, have compassion for the world and think of live, of
right,
the welfare of living creatures. That's nice. We sort of just shrug it off because we sort of take that sentiment for granted today, but people forget just how unheard of that was in much of the pagan world,
right,
outside outside of maybe India and Iran. Like for much of the pagan world, that wasn't even a register. I mean, look, I'm not gonna caricature. I'm not gonna say like everything was just like complete selfish depravity all the time. Communities did have like a sense of togetherness. So at the very least, there was like a sense of duty to your community in much of the pagan world, like care for your ancestors, care for the people in your village or your town or whatever.
right,
But even then, it was mostly in rural communities. In most like urban pagan civilizations, it really was like every man for himself. There wasn't any sort of inclination to care for the beggar and all that. The pagan cultures where that did have a sense of like community welfare and caring for one another were typically either rural agriculturalists or nomadic in some fashion, like
right,
nomadic herders and pastoralists and or hunter gatherers, because you kind of have to, and like you kind of have to, otherwise you all die, because it's you're in a much greater like need for survival and you need each other. And B, that sort of struggling through famines or struggling to find herding grounds and working together builds tighter emotional bonds. So I would say that for much of the pagan world, the the most compassionate communities were like the small sort of tight knit rural communities. And but again, this sort of drives home what I'm saying, because they were on the right track. Love your neighbor, care for your neighbor. Be everyone should behave themselves. Don't steal from each other. Keep societal cohesion. Otherwise, you all die. You know what I mean? But
right,
but rarely ever did that extend past your immediate community, like your village or your tribe of nomads or whatever, right? Like even for those cultures, it's like, okay, that's how you should be towards your fellow tribesmen. and women. But as for everyone else, you can, if survival warrants that you go raid their settlement, steal their resources and kidnap their women and children and kill all the men, then hey, that's, you got to do what you got to do, right? Like, so so from an ancient perspective, the fact that any work of literature, whether Christian and Jewish or pagan, is saying have a like consider the welfare of the whole world of all living beings,
Right.
including like the poor people, the downtrodden people. That is revolutionary by the standards of the day. That is mind blowing.
Right. Yeah, it is. It is. And like you said, it's like I think to a certain extent we miss how like awesome it is to see something like this because we're so used to it in the modern world. But we're so used to it in the modern world because Jesus has made this like because of the influence of Christianity, this has become the default in much of the world where historically that just wasn't the case. Um, and ironically, now a lot of Christians go over to India and see it as a place where there's a lot of inhumane treatment of people, to be honest, um, and where there's a lot of sort of coldness towards and indifference towards human suffering.
Yeah.
But like, I guess historically, what we're getting at is 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, if a Jew had gone to India, he would have been like, wow, these pagans are so much more virtuous than the Greeks
Then
or the
then
Romans or
the
whatever.
Greeks, the Romans, and basically almost all of the entire Middle East. I kid you not. Like,
Right, exactly. Like, they would have been shocked in the opposite direction. They would have been shocked by how good these people actually were. Um,
yeah, like they believe in compassion towards even the lowest living creatures. That's amazing. Like,
right. Exactly. Like
um,
that would have shocked them the opposite of the reason why we tend to get shocked now. So that does speak to something very beautiful in this text.
and I would say, like, again, over time, as the sort of like Varnas and castes became more stratified, that sense of compassion for all living beings, I feel like faded to a large degree. And so I think guys like Swami Vivekananda were sort of needed figures in India because they called that stuff out all day, every day. Like just walking by a beggar on the street with swords, instead of helping them, sometimes like even castigating their entire nation. Say, like, like we become a nation devoid of compassion, and then we wonder why people go to the Christians or whatever. I would say, like, hey, before we even get to, like, the obviously, like, this is the topic of the show, but like in terms of in person react interactions, before we even get to the religious discussions about what's true, Christianity or Hinduism, like, I would encourage you guys just at least to live up to your full Hindu ideals. Like, be start off by being the best Hindu as you can be, and then we could worry. We'll talk about the gospel, but
Right.
like, I'm gonna actually reverse something that Gandhi said, because Gandhi, when he was, talking, and I would say rightfully so, about the British imperial, like, treatment of Indians and everything, right? He said your I love your Christ. It's I don't love you. I don't like you Christians. So unlike your Christ.
Yeah.
um,
Although
I would.
Gandhi himself was not necessarily that great,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. To the credit of a lot of Hindus, he's not as popular as people think he is in India. But but I'm gonna reverse that. Um, your um your uh your Hinduism or your Hindu sages I like. Uh,
Yeah.
it's you Hindus I have trouble with. You're very unlike your Hinduism. like you're not living up to the ideals your own religion teaches when I think you guys could learn a lot from the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that brings me back to kind of what I was saying earlier when we were talking about the issue of hell and stuff. This is kind of why I say that, like, if you actually, I believe, and
Mm-hmm.
Sako might disagree, or a lot of people would probably disagree, but I
Yeah.
believe that if you do live up to your own ideals, if you lived up to what this is saying, then I think it would actually lead you to Christ. Like, I think that at the other side of that, you would find, like, oh, I'm living up to my Hindu stuff, and then all of a sudden now I'm attracted to Christ. Um, but like, I guess what Sako is saying is feel free to try to prove me wrong. Like, I believe that's going to lead you to Christianity, but you can try to prove me wrong by doing this. Like,
Yeah.
do this, and if it doesn't lead you to Christianity, then like, hey, at least you and I can agree on what a good person is.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe that in and of itself is a start.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so verse 21. Um, whatever an eminent person does, other people also do. Whatever standard he sets, the world follows it. I actually, I'm just gonna say I love this line. Whatever an eminent person does, other people also do. Whatever standard he sets, the world follows it. This reminds me so much of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, one of our
Mm.
greatest saints, who said, "Acquire the spirit of peace within you, and thousands around you will be saved." Another one of our greatest, or well, one of my favorite saints anyway, Tsar Nicholas II. He said, "The higher a person's station is, the more he should do good to others without reminding them of his station." In other words, like what both of them are getting at is this idea that like if you want to change the world, if you want to influence other people, then start by transforming yourself and becoming a righteous person and becoming this person who is filled with the Spirit of Christ, and you'll see that the people around you will be elevated by that. Um, and in Tsar Nicholas's case, he's making the point that like if you're in a position of authority, then burden is twice as great on you because you all automatically sort of have influence over others. So if you
Yeah.
exert
Yeah.
that influence to good, then that's good.
I mean, I mentioned in the past before, but another example of it was during a massive plague that hit the Roman Empire. Everybody was just sort of running and hiding in their houses, and those who didn't have houses, like the beggars and the poor people on the streets, as well as like people who were like thrown out of the house by their families who didn't want to
Hmm.
care for them, um, lest they get sick. They were just like languishing and dying out in the streets. The It was actually the Christians of the Roman Empire that began caring for the sick and the dying, and wealthy Christians even like turned their villas and large houses into makeshift hospitals to care for the sick
Right.
and, and the dead or the dying. So, and the pagans saw this, and again, it blew their minds because it's like, who are these people?
Exactly.
who are these people? Like, do they have no sense of self preservation? Why won't they hide? Let the dead take care of themselves. What are you doing? You're gonna die. You're gonna get sick. Um, But for the Christians, it's like our God commands us to care for the least of his children and all that.
Exactly.
Um, so it's like,
What is my life to me except to serve the needs of another?
yeah, and that also goes for those who we um those we disagree with, including those we really really disagree with. Like okay, good example, like um um like the whole sexual orientation topic, right? Like
Right.
obviously we have very strong uncompromising attitudes when it comes to the the nature of homosexuality and transgenderism, right? But if we saw a transgender person like having gotten hit by a car and like was like laying out in the street, would we like turn up our noses and be like, well, I guess that's God's punishment, ha ha ha? No,
Right.
absolutely not. No, we're gonna run over there, get that, check on that person, get an ambulance over there, even
Exactly.
ride the ambulance with them to the hospital and stay by their bedside, because that is what our God commands us to do.
Exactly. And I actually that's a really good example because I have a family member who's very liberal and always talks about like, being okay with, oh, it's okay to be gay or whatever. Like she totally believes that she's a very accepting person. However, when she actually interacts with homosexuals, I've noticed that she displays like physical disgust. Like I've seen her interact with homosexuals and she like doesn't want to touch that doesn't want to whereas like I obviously have a very uncompromising view of all of that and like you said it's like it's not something I am okay with in any sense, but when I meet people who are involved in that lifestyle and stuff, I just interact with them as people. Like I have
Yeah,
no sort of animosity towards them because who am
yeah.
I to have animosity towards anybody?
I I have two cousins who are gay, one on my mom's side, one on my dad's side, and one of my best friends since childhood, since first grade, is gay. And uh I'm not sure if all of them know about my sort of up to date views, because I used to be much more liberal until like towards the end of my Hinduism and my coming back into the faith.
Mhm.
But one thing that they do know, or that they should know, is that I would take a bullet for them.
Yeah,
Um, like I never look at them with disgust or contempt or whatever. Maybe sadness,
right,
maybe with like hope and like a desperate hope that they turn away from that lifestyle, but never with disgust. So it's like, um and to be fair, there are Christians who, again, don't live up to that ideal. People like the God hates fags people. You know what I mean?
right,
Like the people who show them nothing but like disgust and contempt and like yelling at them and shoving signs in their face or whatever. That's we there's a better way to do that. We teach what the church teaches and we don't shy away from what the church teaches, but we
right.
don't do that. We don't treat people like that. And
Absolutely.
that's not gonna bring them closer to Christ. So it's like, and get before we veer too far off topic, um getting back into the point of what we're talking about, like this compassion towards all living beings. The Christians who were caring for the sick and dying during that plague, right? Among many of the sick and dying would have probably been, pagans who engaged in some sort of, aberrant, deviant sexual behavior.
Right,
Even just their festivals, like we're talking about the Roman Empire, they had festivals that involved orgies, sometimes even involving bestiality.
Yeah. Well, and it
Um,
was very common in the Roman world for people to practice pederasty, and Roman centurions were not allowed to get married, but they were allowed to have sex with,
boys,
any non-persona include, and were even encouraged to take sex slaves as young as like before the age of 9. Like,
what?
oh yeah, they were encouraged to,
I didn't know
whether
it was
male or
I didn't
female.
know it was prepubescent.
Oh yeah, they would.
Oh,
And so like, and here's the thing, we are like 100, even most people who support LGBT stuff, not all, but even most of them are totally opposed to that kind of stuff, thank God. But like you get that from Christianity. Like that's wrong because Christianity reveals that that's wrong. You didn't just figure that out one day. Um and we know
mhm.
that because the ancient Romans didn't know it was wrong. They thought it was pretty cool. Uh
Right.
so
So yeah, so it's like the Christians that were caring for the sick and dying, among the ranks of the sick and dying they were caring for were pagans that practiced everything from pederasty to bestiality on some festivals,
right.
like orgies and
People who had persecuted them even.
yeah, people who even killed them. And these crazy Christians were uh, were like caring for them, giving them medical treatment, and if all hope was lost, holding their hand, uh, holding their hand, and just being there for them in their last moments. For the average pagan Roman, it's like I said, who are these people?
Exactly.
And that by itself, true to what Saint Seraphim Sarov said, brought thousands and thousands of souls into the church, because it's like I didn't know like I didn't know a relationship with the divine could be this way, or I didn't know this kind of love existed.
Exactly.
I like are you for real right now? Like if that's the kind of people that their god is turning them into, I want in,
Exactly. Yeah, it is. Um So that was cool. Verse 21.
Mm.
Verse 22. For me, O Arjuna, there is nothing in all the world which ought to be done, nor is there anything lacking that ought to be acquired, yet I continually engage in action. For if I did not continue to engage myself in action, unwearied, O Arjuna, humankind would follow my example. These worlds would perish if I did not perform action. I would be the author of confusion and the cause of the destruction of these beings. Um, so,
So
and remember, just in case people are confused by this, just remember that the one who's talking to him is their God. So that's why he's saying this. Like, if I didn't do stuff,
if I
then
um if I didn't if I didn't uphold the natural divinely ordained order, everything would just go into chaos.
exactly. In some ways, this is kind of the same argument Jesus makes when the Pharisees accuse him of breaking the Sabbath. He's like, dude, if I didn't work, then the world would stop existing. Like, like my father is working until now, and I am working. Like, this is kind of a similar argument. Um, let's see. 25. Just as the ignorant act with attachment their work, O Arjuna, so should the wise act without attachment, and only for the welfare of the world. The wise should not confuse the minds of the ignorant, who are attached to work, but rather himself performing the work with devotion, he should inspire others to do likewise. all actions being performed in every way by gunas of prakti, one whose mind is deluded by the notion of individuality thinks I am the doer. But he who knows the truth about the divisions of the gunas and their functions, O mighty armed one, through his awareness that the gunas operate on their productions is not attached. Those who are deluded by the gunas of prakti are attached to the functions of the gunas, but one of perfect knowledge should not unsettle the ignorant who do not know the whole truth. Dedicating all your actions to me with a mind centered in the self, free from desire and selfishness, free from hot-headedness, do you engage in battle.
Hmm.
Those people who, full of faith, ever practice this teaching of mine, and who receive it without caviling, even they will be released from karma. But those who carp at my teachings, and those who do not practice these teachings of mine, know them to be seriously deluded and devoid of reasoning and therefore lost. Even an enlightened person acts in conformity to his own nature. Beings follow their nature. What will their restraint do? Or what will restraint do? Attachment and aversion for sense objects abides in the sense organs. Let none come under their sway, for they are one's foes. Better is one's own duty, though devoid of merit, than the duty of another well done. Better is death in one's duty than the duty of another fraught with fear. Arjuna said, but impelled by what, O Krishna, does one err even against one's own will, constrained as it were by force? And the Blessed One said, it is desire, it is anger born of the guna of rajas, all devouring, an impeller to sin. Know this to be the foe here. As a fire is enveloped by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, and as an embryo by the amnion, so is this world enveloped by that desire. Wisdom is obscured by this constant enemy of the wise, O Arjuna, in the form of desire, which is as insatiable as fire. Um, I've said it before, but once again, like their description of the passions is pretty spot on. Like the passions being something that is insatiable, just like fire, just consumes and consumes.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. The sense, the senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its accessories, but these desires deludes the embodied self by concealing its wisdom. Therefore, O Arjuna, controlling these senses, first slay the deluding thing, desire, that destroys both knowledge and discrimination. It is said that the senses are supreme and the mind superior to the senses. The intellect is higher than the mind, but what is greater than the intellect? That is the desire itself. Thus, knowing that which is greater than the intellect and fixing the mind with the help of the intellect, Karma Yoga, O Arjuna, slay the enemy in the form of desire which is difficult to overcome. And that brings us to the end of chapter 3.
Hmm. So let's see what the beginning of chapter 4 says again, the title.
The title is Communion Through Wisdom, or Jnana Vibhaga Yoga.
Okay,
Vibhaga.
so this is gonna get into more of the intellectual stuff. And I think let's see what chapter 5 is. One of
Sure.
those is
Chapter 5 is Karma Sannyasa Yoga, or Communion Through Renunciation.
oh, we're gonna have a lot of fun with that chapter when we get there. That's all about asceticism and
Nice.
monastic living.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So then in that chapter, we'll get to encourage people to fast.
Yes. Um,
Fat. Yeah, go ahead.
and we should also, for comparison to like some of the rules of like ascetic living, um, we can try to see if we could find some canons of monastic orders, like the rule of Saint Benedict, the rule of uh, like uh, the rule of some of the Desert Fathers, like what the rules of their monasteries were to
Right.
compare. It, interestingly enough, at least among the Buddhist communities, but also among a lot of monastic communities in India, they weren't even allowed to plant crops and farm.
Oh, really?
Yeah, part of the life of a sannyasi or ascetic um, was to go around with a begging bowl and actually ask people for food, and in return for food, you would teach them
Hmm.
like you would give them a teaching.
Kind of
Um,
like Roman Catholics, Franciscans.
oh, okay, so they go around like begging for food.
Historically, yeah, historically Franciscans weren't allowed to own anything. So,
Oh, okay.
um, they would go and they would beg, and um, that's one of the reasons why the Protestant reformers were super against monasticism, though, is because they kind of saw, uh, to be honest, they kind of, whether or not this was fair, the Protestant reformers saw Franciscans as kind of like lazy and not really willing to work,
Mm.
and saw them as like kind of a parasite on society. Whereas, like, obviously, um, I mean, I have no real problem with the idea of Franciscans. I'm not saying that to, it's just
Yeah.
a fact of history that, like, Protestants hated monasticism, but when you read their objections to monasticism, it's really clear that they pretty much only knew about Franciscan monasticism and seemed to not really know there were even other kinds of monasticism, at least most Protestant scholars,
Oh
which is
yeah, because
weird.
other monastic orders, which is funny because Luther himself was an Augustinian.
Well, Luther himself wasn't against monasticism. It's
Oh, yeah.
mostly only, I guess, yeah, I should be more clear about that. Luther himself was not actually against monasticism, although later
Yeah.
Lutherans sort of adopted a more anti-monastic position. But Luther was actually cool with people remaining monastics if they wanted to. It was mostly Calvin who was like dead set against any form of monasticism, and then, unfortunately, because of Calvin, Reformed Christianity just went that direction.
Damn it, Calvin.
Yep. Get that
But
gosh darn Calvin!
yeah, yeah,
Him and Hobbes running around, just, you know.
but yeah, so the re I don't know what the motivations for the Hindu ascetics were, but the reason the Buddha made his monastic communities do that is because um he didn't want the monks to sort of like cloister themselves away from the community and just kind of be off doing their own thing,
Oh, yeah.
and like let the community just to its own devices. He wanted them to continuously engage with the community. So by not allowing them to grow their own food, he
Right,
made them dependent on the laity, and so it was a two-way dependency set up. The laity were dependent on the monks for to learn the dharma of the Buddha, the teaching, and the monks were dependent on the laity for their food.
right.
So if it's done right, I think it's something that some Christian monastic communities should consider because engages it engages the two groups with each other more.
Right. That makes sense. I think that that's probably the idea behind it in Franciscan monasteries as well. Although I really don't know because to be perfectly
Mhm.
honest with you, um I'm not super familiar with the Franciscan way of life,
Yeah,
'cause I'm Orthodox. So, and don't really
right.
I don't really have I was raised
What?
Roman Catholic, but like to be honest, I didn't really have any we didn't have any real like
Right.
monasteries around. We had nunneries, but the idea of being a monk was not really something that I was familiar with.
What
'Cause
I what?
yeah, go
Sorry, go ahead.
ahead.
I didn't want to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, it's just because in Roman Catholicism, priests are celibate. So most lay Roman Catholics who aren't like studying canons or anything might
Hmm.
not even really understand that there are people who are celibates who aren't priests, like monks. That's not really a
Yeah.
concept a lot of Catholics get exposed to. At least in my experience. Maybe it's different now, but
Mhm.
back when I was Catholic, like I don't remember anybody ever talking about um the monastic life unless they were going to become a priest.
Yeah. The I think what I like about our Eastern Christian forms of monasticism um is that the monks take up useful trades like carpentry, beekeeping,
Heck yeah, beekeeping.
things. Yeah, yeah. One of our monasteries here in Armenia actually sells honey. The monks keep beehives.
Nice.
Um, so I think maybe in some cases, so maybe a good compromise is okay. The monks aren't allowed to grow their own food, so that they could be like dependent on the laity for their sustenance, but they could earn that food either by like by some means of like tangibly also helping the community, not just like giving like a brief homily, but also like maybe in teaching the students of like one of the nearby townspeople.
Yeah, like have a
Um,
monastic, like have actual schools.
yeah, or like repairing the roof of a nearby homeowner or something if you're a carpenter.
Yeah,
Like
that'd be awesome.
instead of getting paid in money, you get paid in food.
Yeah, I mean that unfortunately we don't live in a feudalist society, so that might not um be totally plausible, but if we did, then you could totally live like that.
Yeah, and it would actually keep the monks from becoming like lazy or complacent because I can,
Exactly.
to be fair to those criticizing the monastics, I can see how that could happen in some cases.
Right. Yeah, I mean, most Protestant critiques of Roman Catholicism, I can see how there's an abuse that they are critiquing. They just usually, because
Yeah,
they're divorced from apostolic Christianity, they usually take their critiques to a place that's frankly dumb. Um, like,
yeah,
well, if this kind of monasticism didn't work, we should have no monasticism at all. Like,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
dumb.
But the people were going too far with the images. Destroy all the images.
Right. Like,
Again, credit where credit is due to the Lutherans. I feel like I feel like if the farthest the Reformation went was Lutheranism and Anglicanism, it wouldn't be so bad. It would just be like a hair
right.
removed from apostolic Christianity.
If the furthest that the Reformation went was Lutheranism and Anglicanism, then they might have been restored by now.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway. All right. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Um, not as many today. I would again just for me the thing that stood out most to me uh from the chapter reading of today was again just that call to work for the welfare of the world.
Yeah.
And whether you're a Hindu or a Christian, like there's it's sort of incumbent on both of us from both of our traditions to keep the lives and well-being of our fellow creatures in mind, because um even the animals,
Right. Mm-hmm.
like one of the, you know, much to the vehement disagreement of Protestants, but like one of the things that a lot of the church fathers believed, and we a lot of us still hold to in the apostolic churches, is that in the beginning, when man was created, we didn't eat meat,
Mm-hmm.
and in the restored world to come, it is arguable that we will not eat meat again. So we would actually feel like, at least as an ideal, we actually wouldn't oppose the Hindu emphasis on vegetarianism out of compassion for creatures.
Right.
Um, where we would just add that, hey, we're we're permitted to do it because of God's condescension to our fallen state, and for reasons probably doing with having to do with the fall, our bodies are such that, at least for most of us, we need animal protein to some degree, or whatever. That's why, like even someone who's a vegetarian might, I've heard that some vegetarians still use poultry because eggs are a good source of protein.
Right.
So it's like um at least the natural world in the state that it is right now is such that, you know if you're gonna like go full on vegan, you have to give yourself all these medicines and supplements or whatever. But the ideal is still there.
Right.
That's why, in many cases, for our Orthodox Lenten practices, we do go full vegan.
Yeah.
Uh, like that's I don't know if this is actually stated in the patristic sources, but I've since coming back into the church and contemplating the beauty of Lent, I've sometimes often wondered if the church didn't institute it to give the animals a little bit of a break, give them a little bit of rest. If Lent is like their Sabbath,
Yeah. Right.
from being eaten,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, it's
so
a beautiful thought, and I agree with you. Um, like actually, my daughter is I don't know that she's like full vegan, but she's mostly vegan. She's vegetarian, and I would never change that about her. I take delight in her beautiful personality that she is
yeah,
vegetarian. I prefer to
there's
let my wife cook, not her, but um
yeah,
but but I
um,
take delight in her and I would never encourage people like if you're a Hindu and you want to become a Christian, you don't have to give up being a vegetarian. Like there's no rule that
yeah,
says you have to eat meat in order to be a Christian. That's just not a rule.
and
For
there's and
me,
there's a
oh yeah, go ahead.
and there's a beautiful passage that I want to show you. I just took a screenshot of it. Let me send it to you on Messenger so you can read it to the audience.
Sure.
It's a passage from the Book of Homilies of Saint Gregory of Tatev, one of our Armenian saints, um, and and he sort of addresses what we're talking about. Hold on. Okay, it's on the page. It's the second paragraph. Like, so it says, and should. It starts with, and should someone say.
I'm just trying to see if I can zoom in here on this because it's kind of small on
Mhm.
the. Here we go, zoom.
maybe you can, yeah, if you click on it, it should expand the image.
Yeah, it is expanded. It's just really tiny. That's okay. And should someone say, how can the breathless and lifeless elements suffer or repose? We say that each element has a guardian and protector angel. They suffer with our wickedness and rest with our good works. Because good works can be worked always and continually, the Lord said, My Father is still working, and I am working. John 5:17. That is the work of providence that makes the animals and the plants give birth, changes kings and rulers, puts the heavens and the luminous bodies into motion, and sustains the earth. It is evident then that when the scripture says God rested from all his works, Genesis 2:3, it meant that God ceased to create new species, but he always works through providence. Thus, we ought to refrain from physical and evil works and increase spiritual and good works. Just as the priests circumcised children on the eighth day in the temple, and it was not considered sin, just as they served the sacred bread with the baked lamb morning and evening on the Sabbath, and just as they gave water to the ox and ass, and brought the fallen animal out of the well, so should we bring our souls, which are submerged in deep sins, out on Sunday, and give water to all ill-mannered people. And on any given day when human beings do good, God considers it a Sabbath and rest. And on Sunday we should refrain from sinning, trading, visiting theaters, watching plays, intriguing, drunkenness, and the pleasures of bed. And if it has been canonized not to genuflect on Sunday, and it was done so, because on Sunday Christ rose from the dead and made us to stand, therefore we should not prostrate ourselves. More so, we should stay steady and avoid falling in on the pleasures of the body. Now, to refrain from physical work is everybody's obligation, so to refrain from sins is an obligation particular to Christians and saints, and to preoccupy.
Okay, I think we. Oh, sorry, and it kind of goes on like that. But okay, we get the idea that um that Saint Tatevatsi here is basically saying like when we sin, and when we like destroy the earth, destroy the natural resources, we are wounding the creation and the angels that oversee those elements of the creation.
Mm-hmm.
So um so at least in an ideal sense we do actually share the idea of compassion for all of God's creation with our Hindu friends. It's
Yes.
a common misconception that Christianity, because it's anthropocentric, because like it sees humans as the crown of creation, that there's sort of this dichotomy that's often seen as like, oh, the Abrahamic religions are like harsh and sort of human centered. So, nature be damned. Humans could cut down all the trees and all that. As long as they're, they're being good Christians or Muslims or whatever. But it's like from a Christian perspective, if you are the guy that's like cutting down all the trees, uh, destroying all the forests, or like
Yeah, that's
injecting
demonic.
yeah injecting all the hormones into poor innocent animals, like that's just it, you're not being a good Christian.
Exactly.
So so um when you read the biblical and patristic literature, there's a running theme of God cares about the animals too, and Jesus uses this to emphasize God's care for us, because he repeatedly makes the point: if God does this, and he gives a bunch of examples of the sparrows, and even like plants. Never mind just the animals, even plants, right? It talks about how God like robes them with beauty and glory. Sorry, so
Yeah.
Um, and he uses that to say, if God cares for these plants and animals so much, how much more does he love and care for you? So, but the takeaway here is that God does care. God
Right.
didn't. God didn't. God gave creation to us so that we would be co-creators to rule over the creation for Him. Sorry, in partnership with Him. He didn't give creation to us to be a playground.
Right.
He made us to be gardeners, not
Not parasites.
yeah, exactly. So I think that's a point of sorry, that's a point of common ground between Christians and Hindus, at least among Orthodox Christians and Hindus. And I would I would exhort our both our Christian and Hindu listeners to live up to the standards set by your sages. Even though it's not dogmatized in the same way that it is for us Christians, I would encourage our Hindu friends treat the commandments, or sorry, treat the teachings of Krishna to like care for the welfare of creatures and all these things as if it was dogma. Treat it
Hmm.
as I would encourage you to treat it not as a should, but as a must. And maybe in doing so, it will bring you a little closer to the God you say you worship.
Hmm. Amen. All right. Well, on that note, I
Oh,
don't have anything to add to that. Oh, go ahead.
you didn't have any closing remarks?
No, no. I don't have anything to add to that. I think you said everything that I would have said. So, thank you so
Oh,
much for
okay.
watching, and please, like, comment, subscribe, and most of all, share this with your friends, especially your Hindu friends, so that they too can be freed indeed. God bless.
God bless. Oh, and before you, okay, after you stop recording, I want to show you something cool.
Oh, yeah.